What happens when a man who trusts no one meets a woman who expects nothing? Can decades of loneliness be undone by a single act of kindness? And is it ever too late to rediscover the kind of love that money can't buy? Graham Ellis had it all: fortune, fame, and a life built on precision and control. But behind the boardrooms and business headlines was a man quietly unraveling, haunted by questions he couldn't answer. Who can I trust? Is goodness still real then? One ordinary night in a forgotten corner of the city, he walked into a small diner and met Emily. She was not trying to impress. She didn't know his name, and yet something about her gentleness, her quiet dignity, began to undo the walls he had spent a lifetime building. But was her kindness real, or just another illusion? This is a story about trust, lost and rediscovered, about two strangers from different worlds, brought together by coincidence and held together by something much deeper. Stay with us as we follow Graham and Emily through a journey of silent tests, buried pasts, and the slow blooming of something real. If you believe in the power of kindness and second chances, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Now, let's begin. There are moments in life when the richest man in the room is the one who feels the poorest. Graham Ellis was 41, the founder of a major tech company headquartered in the heart of Boston. His life, at least on paper, was enviable. A skyline apartment, invitations to every exclusive gala, and a bank account that could silence almost any problem. But silence was exactly what haunted him. In the stillness of late nights, when the screens dimmed and voices faded, Graham was left with a weight he couldn't name. He had everything except the one thing he couldn't buy: the assurance that someone might see the man behind the fortune. Over the years, success had become a fortress. Each deal closed, each accolade won, added a new layer of distance between him and the world outside. No matter how many names filled his contact list, no one truly knew him, and he didn't know who to trust anymore. It was in the chill of an early March evening, just past 8 o'clock, that Graham stepped away from the world he knew. His driver had taken a wrong turn in a quieter part of the city, Southridge, a neighborhood he hadn't visited in decades. Spotting a dimly lit diner tucked beneath a flickering sign that read Nora's Table, something inside him told him to go in. He pushed open the door and was met by warmth, the clink of cutlery, faint music playing from an old radio. It felt untouched by time, comfortable in a way his designer living room never had. He chose a booth near the window, and not long after, a young waitress approached. Her name tag read Emily, and she looked no older than 26. Her voice was soft but clear, and her smile wasn't the kind people give to impress. It was the kind that says, "I see you." Emily didn't ask what he did for a living, didn't hover, didn't try too hard, and that unsettled him. He watched her as she moved from table to table, offering gentle words to an elderly couple, helping a child pick up a fallen spoon, refilling mugs with practiced care. Her kindness wasn't loud, it was quiet, constant, and real. And in Graham's world, that kind of kindness had all but disappeared. A thought crossed his mind, a thought born not from arrogance, but from longing. What if she's different? And then, more cynically, or is she just like the others, hiding expectation behind politeness? As he got up to use the restroom, he left his wallet on the edge of the table, not by mistake, but as a quiet question. He stood before the sink, water running, his reflection looking back at him with weary eyes. He wasn't worried about losing the money. That wasn't the point. He just needed to know if someone out there still chose honesty without audience. When he returned, the wallet was no longer on the table. A familiar pang tightened in his chest. He sat down, scanning the room discreetly. Emily was at the counter, chatting softly with a man in a postal uniform. Her posture was relaxed. Nothing seemed off. He was about to rise and ask, when she walked toward him, holding the wallet in both hands. "I think this belongs to you," she said, placing it gently in front of him. "Found it right where you left it. Her tone was warm but not overly sweet, like she had done it 100 times before and never expected praise for it. Graham looked at her, really looked, and in her steady gaze there was no sign of performance, just a human being doing what felt right. He nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. Part of him felt relieved, part of him disappointed, not because she had passed the test, but because he hadn't realized how much he had hoped she would fail just to confirm what he had come to believe about the world. But Emily had undone something in him. That night, as he walked out of Nora's table, wallet tucked away, a strange ache followed him. A question he hadn't expected to ask. What if goodness still exists, and I've just forgotten how to see it? The next night, long after he had returned home, the image of Emily standing beside his table, wallet in hand, kept replaying in his mind. He had tried for years to stay in control, to anticipate every move, every angle, but what she had done, it unsettled him. There had been no calculation, no pause. It was honesty, unadorned, and he needed to know, was that moment a glimpse, or the whole truth? He would go back. And this time, the test would go deeper. Graham had hoped for something simple, a slip, a sign, a single moment where Emily's mask would fall and reveal that she, too, was playing the same game as everyone else. That would have made things easier. That would have kept his world predictable. But now, the edges of his doubt were starting to blur. What if she truly was that selfless? What if he had been wrong again the way he had been so many times before? One thing was clear, he couldn't just walk away from this. The first test had been too smooth, too easy. It lacked depth, and Graham knew better than to trust simplicity. If her character was truly as steadfast as it seemed, he needed to see it under pressure, in an imperfect moment, when no one was watching. So, the following evening, he returned to Nora's table. This time, he ordered a more complicated dish, something that would take longer to prepare, an excuse to linger. As he waited, he engaged her in light conversation, not flirtatious, not forced, just enough to open a door. Emily remained pleasant and patient, answering his questions without hesitation. But as the minutes passed, her words opened small windows into her life. Her father had passed the year before. Cancer. Swift and cruel. Her mother's health had since declined, and Emily had taken on 2 jobs while trying to finish her degree in social work. She spoke of it not to earn sympathy, but as if these were simply facts of life, pieces of a reality she had chosen to carry with grace. There was no bitterness in her voice, no trace of self-pity. Graham found himself drawn in, not just by her resilience, but by the absence of entitlement. She wasn't asking for kindness. She gave it freely, without demand. And yet, in the stillness between her words, he caught it. A flicker. A moment when her eyes faltered, a quiet grief she quickly tucked away beneath a smile. She wore her hope like armor, and it made Graham feel something he hadn't expected: respect. But still, he needed to be sure. As the evening stretched on, Graham excused himself once more, said he needed to step outside for a phone call. This time, he left the wallet just slightly visible near the edge of the table. Then, he slipped out the front door and watched from the sidewalk through the large diner window. She moved from one table to the next. For a moment, she didn't see it. Then she did. Emily's eyes settled on the wallet. She paused, looked around the room, not in panic, but with quiet focus. Her fingers reached for it, not greedily, but carefully. Graham held his breath. Instead of pocketing it, she walked to the counter and slid the wallet behind the register. She didn't mention it to anyone. She didn't even glance back at his table. She simply went back to work. When Graham returned a few minutes later, she greeted him with the same steady tone. "You seem to be in the habit of forgetting this," she said gently, offering the wallet with a soft smile. "Maybe next time. I'll keep it safe until you're back." No judgment, no sarcasm, just calm, clear-eyed honesty. Graham accepted it, smiling politely to cover the storm inside him. She had passed again, without falter, without hesitation, not even the weight of her personal struggles, the grief, the exhaustion, the pressure had made her waver, and that, somehow, left him more unsettled than if she had failed. For the next few days, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He replayed her words, her voice, the way she carried herself, quietly strong, quietly good. He tried to convince himself this was still just curiosity, but deep down, Graham knew something in him was beginning to shift, and he wasn't sure what to do with that. At first, Graham told himself it was only about the test, a simple experiment, a way to understand whether people like Emily, people who gave without asking, still truly existed. But something was shifting, slowly and against his will. He had begun the whole thing to prove a point that everyone had a price, that even the kindest faces would crumble under pressure. But now, he wasn't so sure, because the more he watched her, the more he couldn't help but admire her. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. Doubt lingered in the corners of every interaction. What if the tests hadn't been enough? What if, deep down, she was just clever and careful? So he pushed further. Night after night. Graham returned to Nora's table, always choosing Emily's section. And each time, he found a new way to test her. One evening, he tucked a folded bill beneath the salt shaker. Another night, he left his silver wristwatch near the windowsill. Later that week, he slipped a signed check, blank but valid, into a napkin fold. Each time, Emily found the item and returned it with the same quiet grace. There were no questions, no hesitation, no flicker of temptation. She never kept a cent. Graham watched all of it from behind polite smiles and casual conversations, and slowly, something within him softened. There was a steadiness to her that unsettled him, a rare dignity. He had built empires on instinct, crushed negotiations with his sharpness, but none of it had prepared him for someone who simply chose kindness, again and again. And yet, he could not silence the voice in his head. Could anyone really be this good, or was it all a carefully crafted act? He had met people who could lie with their eyes, flatter with their silences. Could Emily be one of them, simply better at the game? The more she passed each test, the more he began to doubt himself, and the doubt hurt. Weeks passed. The routine continued. Graham came in, placed his orders, left his clues. She responded every time with the same unwavering integrity. She remained humble, grounded, always kind. And yet, he grew more conflicted. Why hadn't she taken anything? Why hadn't she even hesitated, not once, despite how much she clearly needed it? She wasn't just honest. She was consistent, almost unbearably so. And then, one night, long after most customers had left, Graham lingered at his usual booth with a half-empty cup of coffee, his thoughts heavy. Across the room, Emily stood speaking with another waitress, her tone hushed, her shoulders slightly slumped. Graham didn't mean to listen, but he couldn't help it. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this going," she said softly, her voice thin. "I've been picking up extra shifts, but Mom's medications, they keep piling up. And school, I'm falling behind." There was a pause, then a quiet sniffle. "I might have to drop out, just until things settle, but I'm scared if I do. I won't go back." Her words hit him harder than he expected. For all his efforts to uncover who she truly was, he had never considered what she might be carrying behind her smile. He had been so obsessed with her honesty that he had forgotten her humanity. While he played games with lost wallets and planted bills, she had been fighting real battles, quiet ones, invisible ones, with no one to help her. A strange wave of guilt swept over him. He had tested her like a puzzle to be solved, not a person to be seen. And still, despite everything, she had never let it touch the way she treated others, never let her struggle turn her bitter, never let her pain become someone else's burden. That night, As Graham walked out of the diner, his steps felt heavier. The truth was no longer what he had been searching for. Now, the question was different. What does someone like me do when faced with a heart I don't deserve? Graham sat in the booth, still reeling from what he had overheard the night before. All this time, he had been so wrapped up in orchestrating tests, in trying to expose a flaw, that he hadn't once stopped to ask himself what Emily might be carrying beneath that steady smile. He had treated her like a puzzle to be solved, something to dissect, but never as a whole person. And yet, through it all, through every planted bill, every moment of false absence, she had met him with nothing but quiet decency. Now, as he watched her moving through the diner, her hair slightly undone from a long shift, her steps a little slower than usual, a new thought formed inside him. He wanted to help, but not with charity, not with money stuffed in envelopes or left on tables. No, that would only insult the very thing he admired most about her. He needed to find a way to offer her something real, something that wouldn't compromise her pride, something she could say yes to without losing the part of herself that had stayed so fiercely intact. That night, as he left Nora's table, a plan began to take shape, one that felt different from the rest. By the following afternoon, he had made up his mind. He returned to the diner just before the dinner rush, ordered his usual meal, and waited until she came by with her notepad in hand. "Emily," he said, his voice low but clear, "do you have a minute?" She looked surprised, maybe a little wary, but she nodded. "I've been coming here for a while now," Graham began. "And in that time, I've watched how you treat people, how you work, how you carry yourself even when no one's paying attention." He paused, searching for the right words. "I admire that more than I can explain." Emily tilted her head, unsure what to make of the moment. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I just try to do what I can. Life? Well, it's not always easy." Graham nodded, his eyes steady. "That's exactly it. You do more than most would, and I think you're capable of more than what this place allows." She blinked, taken off guard. He continued, "I run a company downtown. I need someone I can trust to help me with scheduling, correspondence, organizing things I've let fall behind. I need someone dependable, who pays attention, who has integrity." He let the words settle before adding, "I think you're that person." Emily's expression shifted surprise, confusion, even a flicker of disbelief. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I've never worked in an office before. I wouldn't even know where to start." "You don't need experience," Graham replied. "You've already shown me everything that matters. Work ethic, honesty, heart." Her gaze dropped to the table, her fingers brushing against the rim of her notepad. She didn't speak for a moment. "I don't want to take something just because it's offered," she said softly. "I've seen too many people regret walking into something they didn't fully understand, especially when it comes from someone who holds all the cards." He understood what she meant, the fear that kindness might come with strings. So he said only this: "I'm offering you an opportunity, not a favor. What you do with it is entirely up to you." She looked up again, her eyes meeting his. There was a stillness between them. Then, after a long moment, she nodded. "All right," she said. "I'll try. Thank you for believing I can do more." Graham didn't show it, but her answer struck something deep within him. He hadn't expected her to say yes. Not so easily. Not without suspicion. But she had. And not out of desperation, out of courage. And maybe trust. In that quiet moment, he realized this wasn't just about her anymore. Maybe it never had been. In the weeks that followed, Emily stepped into her new role with the same quiet diligence that had once defined her work at the diner. Now, in Graham's world of sharp suits and silent elevators, she brought that same steady presence, calm, focused, and unshakably grounded. She managed his overflowing schedule with ease, coordinated meetings across time zones, and brought a sense of calm to the organized chaos of his life. But what surprised Graham most was how naturally she began to tend to his personal life, too, not with obligation, but with care. She noticed when he skipped meals, reminded him to call his sister back, and kept track of the small things that no one else ever had. Through it all, Emily remained herself. No airs, no shift in how she carried her responsibilities. She didn't act like someone who had risen into a better position. She simply did her job fully, attentively, and with the same quiet integrity that had first caught his eye. And slowly, Graham began to rely on her not just for the logistics of his life, but for something less definable: her insight, her presence, her company. He found himself sharing more than he ever had before: small thoughts, old stories, things he'd once learned to keep to himself. With Emily, it felt safe. But even as trust began to grow, a voice deep inside him remained cautious. He had built his life learning how to protect himself from betrayal. People had once smiled in his face and then turned away with pieces of him in their hands. Could Emily be different? Could anyone he didn't want to doubt her not anymore? But fear, once learned, has a long memory. And then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Emily was sorting through archived documents in the study when she found an old photograph tucked between folders. It was faded, edges curling, but the image was clear: two men laughing in the sun, arms around each other like brothers. Her breath caught. One of the men was younger Graham, and the other unmistakably was her father. Her heart began to race. She had known her father had worked in finance before walking away from it all to open his own auto shop. He had mentioned a friend named Graham. Long ago, someone brilliant, driven, and kind, someone he respected deeply. But she never imagined this Graham was that Graham. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the photo, memories unspooling in her mind: her father's late nights, his quiet sadness after leaving his old life, the things he never said. She crossed the room and found Graham seated at his desk, reviewing a report. There was a stillness in her step, but her voice held steady. "Graham," she said softly, "I came across something. I think you should see it." He looked up, curiosity flickering across his face. She placed the photo in front of him. "I believe that's my father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Graham stared down at the image. A pause. Then, quietly, "Richard Hale." "Yes." She nodded. "You knew him?" Graham leaned back in his chair, something in his face shifting: memory, regret, recognition. "We were close once," he said, his voice touched with something heavier than nostalgia. "He was my partner, my friend. We built our first company together." "Why did it end?" Emily asked, not accusingly, just wanting to understand. Graham exhaled slowly, gaze distant. "I lost my way," he said. "Ambition got the better of me. I pushed him too hard on a deal he didn't believe in. He walked away, and I let him." A silence stretched between them. Emily looked down at the photo again. "He never spoke poorly of you. He always said you had a good heart, just too much weight on your shoulders." Graham swallowed, emotion catching unexpectedly in his throat. "I never had the courage to reach out," he said. "I thought I had time." Emily nodded slowly. "He forgave you. You know, in his own way." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, but something passed between them, a quiet recognition of how lives intertwine in ways we can never fully predict. And in that moment, Graham no longer saw Emily as just the girl from the diner. She was the daughter of someone he had once cared for, someone he had once hurt. And now, she stood here not with blame, but with understanding. He realized then, perhaps for the first time, that his tests had ended, because she had never been the one on trial. He had. Graham's voice had softened, his gaze far away. "I pushed too hard," he said. Speaking of Emily's father, I was obsessed with scaling faster, winning bigger. Richard wasn't built for that kind of pressure. He walked away, and I never stopped regretting it. Emily sat quietly across from him, her hands resting gently on the table. She had always known her father to be a man of quiet principle, someone who believed in doing the right thing even when it cost him. But hearing Graham's side, she saw the story in a new light, not through headlines or assumptions, but through truth. My dad never spoke about the details, she said after a moment, but he never seemed bitter. He always said he was happier fixing cars than fighting over contracts. Graham smiled faintly, pain flickering behind his eyes. I didn't understand it back then, he admitted. I thought success meant building bigger, faster, richer. But I was wrong. I chased all the wrong things. And in the end, I was left with silence. No real friendships. No one who knew me. Just achievements that couldn't speak back. Emily looked at him and for the first time saw not the polished businessman, but a man who had carried his own quiet heartbreaks. And maybe, she realized, that's all any of us are. People trying to find our way through the damage. I've been testing you, Graham said, his voice barely above a whisper now, over and over, trying to figure out if you were different, if I could trust you. But the truth is, I'm the one who needed to change. You reminded me what it looks like to live with honesty, with heart. Emily's response came gently, without judgment. I never asked to be tested, she said. I just wanted to do my job well and take care of the people I love. But maybe we both needed this to learn what we had forgotten. Something shifted inside Graham then, something deep and long buried. For most of his life, he had believed that vulnerability was dangerous, that trust was a luxury reserved for the naive. He had armored himself with distance, mistaking isolation for protection. But now, with Emily sitting across from him, not as an employee, but as an equal, he felt those walls begin to crack. Over the next few weeks, their work began to take on new meaning. Together, they launched small initiatives inspired by Emily's values, providing school supplies for low-income families, supporting local clinics, funding shelters in neighborhoods Graham had once ignored. He began using his resources not for profit or prestige, but for people, for purpose. And through it all, Emily stood beside him, not as someone chasing status, but as someone guiding the work with quiet conviction. The longer they worked together, the more Graham realized he was becoming someone he barely recognized, and yet someone he finally respected. Gone was the man who measured his worth in contracts and closing deals. In his place was a man learning to listen, to give, to connect. And Emily, the girl who once served coffee behind a counter, had become the mirror through which he had begun to rebuild his life. What had started as a job had turned into something far more meaningful, because in each other they had both discovered something they hadn't known they were missing. A way forward. There is a kind of freedom that comes not from money or power, but from knowing that you are finally using your life for something that matters. Graham had spent decades building companies, wealth, reputation, but none of it ever gave him the sense of purpose he now felt sitting beside Emily, shaping something that didn't just serve shareholders, but served real lives. Together, they had created something lasting. Emily brought vision, empathy, and a deep understanding of where the world most needed kindness. Graham brought the means to move those ideas forward. It was a partnership of balance, of action and intention. They launched a scholarship program for students from underserved communities, kids who had potential, but not the resources to pursue it. They helped cover tuition, provided mentorship, and made sure no dream was lost simply because of a missing dollar. They also built a small foundation dedicated to community health funding, care for families who, like Emily's once had, struggled with the impossible weight of medical bills. The work was quiet, steady, and deeply healing. And through it all, something else took root, something they hadn't planned. The professional lines that once separated them began to blur, not inappropriately, not suddenly, but gently, in lingering glances, in late-night conversations after the office had gone quiet, in the way they began to rely on each other not just for results, but for presence. Emily was no longer the girl behind the counter. She had become a leader in her own right, clear in her voice, confident in her choices, driven by the same quiet courage that had always defined her. And Graham, once armored by doubt, had softened in ways he didn't know he could. One evening, the two of them sat in the office reviewing the latest update from their team. The sun had begun to dip below the skyline, bathing the room in gold. Outside, the city moved as always, but inside, time seemed to pause. Graham looked over at her. His expression was quiet, thoughtful. "I never imagined this," he said, the words falling from his lips like a confession. "I've spent so much of my life chasing numbers, goals, deals. But you reminded me what I was missing." Emily turned to him, her face warm with emotion. "I think we both had to remember," she said gently. "You can spend your whole life chasing something because you think it defines you. But real worth, it's not in things. It's in the lives we live. It's in how we show up for each other." Graham nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "I want to keep doing this," he said, his voice soft but sure. "Not just the work, but this path. With you." Emily's breath caught slightly, and for a moment the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the world outside. "I never thought I'd end up here," she said, "but I'm so glad I did. I'm glad we met." He reached across the table, his hand finding hers with gentle certainty. "I want to build something with you, Emily," he said. "Not just for others, for us. I want to keep learning, keep giving, and I want to do it with you beside me." The weight of his words settled around them, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt like truth, like something real, finally beginning. There were no more hidden agendas, no more silent trials or unspoken doubts. Just two people, honest and unguarded, choosing to walk forward together. Emily gave Graham's hand a quiet squeeze, her eyes bright, her voice gentle. "I'd like that," she said. Together? From that day on, everything changed, not in grand, cinematic ways, but in steady, purposeful steps. They continued their work side by side, not as boss and employee, not as giver and receiver, but as true partners. They built more than just programs or initiatives. They built trust. They built healing. They built something that mattered. Their foundation grew into a lifeline for people long overlooked, offering scholarships, medical aid, and chances at new beginnings. It wasn't just about giving money. It was about giving people the dignity to dream again. And they did it all from the same place of quiet conviction that had brought them together in the first place. Over time, their efforts touched the lives of thousands of students who once thought college was impossible, families drowning in hospital debt, shelters that now had roofs and warm meals through the winter. But when Graham and Emily looked back on it all, what stayed with them most wasn't the numbers or the headlines. It was the journey, the small, invisible moments, the tears behind closed doors, the laughter shared in between planning meetings, the gentle unfolding of two guarded hearts learning how to trust again. Graham had spent most of his life chasing the idea of success. He had built towers out of profit and climbed ladders made of deals, but none of it had ever filled him the way this new life had, a life rooted in purpose, in connection, in love. Emily had reminded him, not with words, but with actions, that integrity wasn't a performance. It was a way of living, a choice you made, even when no one was watching. And in turn, Graham had given her something too. Not just opportunity, but belief that her strength mattered, that her compassion could change more than just one customer's day. Together, they had become more than what the world expected them to be. Years later, they would sit together in the garden outside their foundation's community center, hands clasped like always, listening to the laughter of children running by. And when asked what their greatest achievement had been, neither spoke of business or buildings or money. Instead, Graham said simply, "We learned how to love, and to give that love away." Because in the end, the real legacy wasn't in what they had owned, it was in the lives they had touched, the hope they had restored, and the quiet, unwavering truth they had found in each other. Sometimes, the most extraordinary stories begin in the quietest places, over a cup of coffee, a forgotten wallet, or a simple act of honesty. Graham thought he was testing Emily, but in the end, it was his own heart being tested and slowly healed. Through kindness, trust, and the courage to open up again, two strangers discovered not just each other, but a new way of living, one that wasn't built on wealth or control, but on compassion, humility, and love. Their journey reminds us that true richness doesn't lie in what we own, but in the people we help, the lives we touch, and the love we choose to give. If this story moved you, if it made you believe again in the quiet power of goodness, then please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because somewhere out there, someone may need this story just like Graham did. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.